right. Oh man, oh man, oh man. Welcome to the HEF podcast. Podcast episode 148. The HEF podcast is the podcast of the Home Education Foundation, which is an organization that was started by the beloved Brenda Dickinson and her husband Craig Dickinson in the early 1990s, just after securing a victory in the 1980s to make home education a right of every parent, spelled out and protected. Let's be fair. Parents have the right to raise and teach their own children innately, but having it spelled out in law and protected is a boon that we can lean on and rely on and point to, that allows us to hold the line when it comes to our rights being aggressed, taken advantage of, or pushed back. And so we're very thankful for Brenda and Craig and the legislature at that time, and all the early parents who put in the effort to push and get the word out. And what we have today, 40 years later, wow, is home education freedom in the state of Florida, to the tune of such freedom that other states are copying what Florida does. Florida is one of the front runners in educational freedoms, and we want to keep it that way. My name is Jason Crawford. I'm the host of the HEF podcast and the new torch bearer for the Home Education Foundation, the voice of parents in the Capitol. And today we're going to dive in and tell those parents thank you. Parents in the free state of Florida, those home education families, for supporting the work that we do. We thank you. In fact, our support comes through parents who believe in what we do. And it comes from our top sponsors, Arete, FPEA, Fisher Precious Metals, and TBHC Group. We don't have any big tech backers. We don't have any fancy, super fancy, big donors. Hey, if you're one out there and you're listening and you want to change that for us, you go right ahead. flhef.org/support. Reach out to us. It's not that we don't want supporters. It's that this is mostly a grassroots effort. This is from the ground up, the voice of parents in the Capitol, supported by the parents and those who believe in the work that we do. And we're thankful to our top sponsors. Today, I have the privilege of having Brenda Dickinson with me again. Brenda, thank you for joining us.
I'm happy to do so.
I know when we first started doing the podcast, it's episode 148. So when we started doing,
we had that much to talk about.
148 weeks ago.
Yeah.
It's been a ride. It's been an interesting ride. I remember when I first gave you the idea, before I even came on fully, and we were just putting the communication strategy together and talking about the future of the Home Education Foundation and how do we pass the torch to someone. And I said, well, first, we have to keep the history alive. We have to keep where we started, the roots, alive and appreciated. And so we started the podcast. And you were like, well, I don't know anything about that. And you can tell me a little bit more about your thoughts at the time. I won't speak for you, but it was interesting. And I said, you just show up. You just show up, and I'll take care of all of the tech stuff, all of the rest. And so sometimes we're a little late. We're getting started, but we're consistent, doggone it. Here we are. We have a very special episode today, and I hope that all of the technology agrees with us and goes right along with everything. Because we sent out an invitation to all of the gubernatorial candidates, and I'm going to explain the premise of what it was by reading the invitation that we gave to them, because in that invitation, it pretty much spells out all of the details of what the interviews would be. And we sent out these interviews on June 25th to give ample time for any of the candidates that were invited to to schedule an interview, to host it virtually, to record it, and to come on. We've had calls from our community to say, hey, don't just have one side of the aisle candidates, get everybody you can. So we did. We sent out the invitation to Bobby Williams, who is a Republican grassroots, Rachel Rodriguez, who is a Republican grassroots. We sent out invitations to Jason Pizzo, who was formerly of the Democrat Party and then went non-party affiliated, Paul Renner, James Fishback, Jay Collins, Dodie Joseph from the Democratic side of the aisle, and David Jolly. And, of course, we sent an interview invitation to Byron Donalds. And as you know, and you've been watching some of the debates or the news cycles, and everyone's sending out all of their messages, it's getting pretty intense out there. And so we weren't sure if any of the candidates would see us in their inbox. So we made sure to send out the invitations 3 times. And some of them said, oh, we have scheduling conflicts and we couldn't make it. And I'm not going to pick on any particular person, but we were able to secure 2 of the candidates for interview. And so we're going to play those full interviews today. The promise was that the interviews would be recorded, that everyone would have the questions up front, and it would be fair, so they'd all have time to prep, they would all know exactly what we were going to ask. We would just stick to the questions, ask the questions, let them answer them, and then publish the interviews uncut so that our community could have their questions answered. And the questions actually are sourced from our board, our board's input, as well as input from the community as a whole. We did also post in our Discord. I didn't get a lot of information from parents in our Discord at the time, but I did have, after I posted it there, people text me with some of their questions, which is also fine, I guess. Needless to say, we sourced 10 questions from our community and from our board, and we're going to display those interviews, those 2 interviews, in the order of acceptance. So who accepted first will be the first interview, and the second person that you'll see, because there's only 2, will be the second interview. And that was just kind of try to keep everything uniform, do it in chronological order, be fair to everyone. So I will read you, before I do that, before I read the invitation so that people know the scope of everything. Brenda, do you have any comments?
No, I'm just amazed that with their busy schedules, you got these 2 to come on.
Yeah, it shows for both of the candidates, it shows their interest in being heard by this community, and that transparency and that interest. I do think that both of these interviews are strong, and I do think that parents are going to learn a lot about the candidates by hearing some of the questions that we ask. So without anything else, I'm going to dive in so that our community will know exactly what it was that we asked of the candidates. So here's how the invitation went. Dear candidate or campaign team, on behalf of the Home Education Foundation, flhef.org, I would like to formally invite you to appear as a guest for a specialized, highly focused interview regarding the future of governance, liberty, and educational freedom in the state of Florida. The HEF podcast gets about 40,000 reach monthly and is hyper-focused on Florida and home education, who we are and our legacy. The Home Education Foundation holds a historic place in Florida's educational landscape. Our story began in the early 1980s when our co-founder Brenda Dickinson, alongside her late husband Craig, championed and co-authored the very legislation that legalized and recognized parent-directed home education in Florida in 1985. For over 4 decades, Brenda has served as a dedicated full-time voice and watchdog at the Capitol in Tallahassee, evaluating thousands of bills to protect families' constitutional rights. Today, FLHEF continues this vital mission, ensuring our vast community of home educators and parent advocates remains deeply informed, vigilant, and legally secure. Our diverse community and core values. The FLHEF platform is strictly nonpartisan, independent, and fiercely neutral. We do not look at political jersey colors or cultural divides. Our community represents a rich, vibrant tapestry of religious, secular, racial, and ideological diversity. We are everyday Florida voters driven by a desire for options, excellence, and customized opportunities for our children. Despite this diverse makeup, our audience stands completely united under 3 non-negotiable core values. Self-governance. We believe families are the foundational building blocks of society and thrive best when free from unnecessary bureaucratic intervention. Freedom. We champion the liberty of families to choose the educational path that best aligns with their convictions without state-imposed constraints. And parental authority. We view the parent as the ultimate supreme authority over their families and children, maintaining that no state or institutional entity supersedes this innate right. Interview structure, scope, and main theme of our main theme. Our community consists of families who have made profound personal and financial sacrifices for decades, paying into the public system while simultaneously funding their children's custom education out of pocket. They want to hear exactly where the future governor stands on the clear balance of power in education. The overarching theme of this interview series is Our Children, Our Choices. Are you committed to keeping education in parents' hands? To respect your time and busy election cycle, we have designed a strict, hyper-focused format. Unlike our typical 1-hour live broadcasts, these candidate interviews are pre-recorded individually and will be compiled into back-to-back mega episode for our audience. The timeline. The entire interview is strictly limited to 20 minutes. The format. We will walk through 10 specific questions attached separately to this email for your review, allowing a dedicated 2 minutes per question. The rules of engagement. Any remaining time from the 20-minute block will be opened for natural dialogue to address any points that need deeper elaboration. Please note, this interview is a highly targeted policy discussion. It is not an invitation to discuss your wider campaign platform, nor is it a forum to take aim at political opponents or discuss the general dynamics of the gubernatorial race. To honor our commitment to our listeners, all candidate interviews will air completely uncut and unedited. Because we will not edit these recordings, keeping responses directly within the scope of the questions and the core theme remains the sole responsibility of the candidate. Any deviation into partisan attacks or off-topic campaign rhetoric will result in the removal of the interview from the final episode. Logistics. We are highly flexible and will coordinate with your press team to pre-record this 20-minute segment at a time that best accommodates your travel schedule. Episode 148 is set to air July 13th, 2026. It will include all of the candidates who have responded and recorded by that date. Thank you for your time, your leadership, and your service to the state of Florida. We look forward to receiving your confirmation and scheduling your segment. Warm regards. And then I signed it. That is a lot. But
great.
It very carefully sets up the scope of everything. And I don't need to say anything else because that pretty much says it all. So without anything further, I did want to say something. We did not remove any episodes or any of the interviews due to anyone going off topic or anything like that. We simply only had 2 that agreed to schedule and 2 that we're going to air. So without anything further, I know everyone's been waiting probably 20 minutes, and I don't want to keep them waiting any longer. Here you are with the interviews. So let me make sure this works. Share sound. Back to this. Okay. Now I believe we're set here. I'm going to go ahead and start them. Here we go.
That's an important theme.
All right. Here we are on the HEF podcast with former Speaker of the House, Paul Renner, and gubernatorial candidate for the state of Florida. I feel like you need no introduction, but for our audience that's listening today, tell them something they may not know about you. Maybe they haven't heard on the campaign trail.
Sure. Well, life outside of politics, married, 2 kids, a 6-year-old daughter, 4-year-old son. Before politics, 20 plus years in the military. I served in 2 wars, Operation Desert Storm as a young naval officer, then as a commander in the Navy in Afghanistan. Also was a state prosecutor down in Broward County. So I've tried violent habitual offenders. I've started my own law practice, been a partner in another law practice. So I've been a business owner in the private sector world. And of course, Speaker of the House is what most people know as the leader in the legislature, really kind of the number 2 below the governor in terms of $100+ billion budgeting and setting the agenda and priorities, one of which was HB1, of course, that created the PEP program for those that participate in PEP. That was me and the staff kicking around. What can we do for homeschoolers?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And I want to be respectful. The format is kind of uniform to all the candidates that we've invited on. So I'll just jump right into the questions. There's 10 questions. You get 2 minutes each. If you save time on them, no worries. Sure. We can do a little bit on the end and kind of let you have a little bit of a free space at the end. But other than that, we'll just roll right in. So question 1, in your view, does the state grant parents the right to direct their children's education, or does the state merely recognize an innate right that already belongs to the parent? And why does this distinction matter to your administration?
Well, it matters entirely, and it's that our rights come from God, not from government. That is enshrined in the U.S. Constitution. They're listed in the U.S. Constitution. But as Justice Scalia, the late Justice Scalia, pointed out, the Soviet Union had at the time when they existed a written constitution that they never followed. They didn't recognize those God-given rights that were there on paper. They were, persecuting their citizens, and so. It is important, though, I think, to have in place in a written constitution, because it does create greater guardrails. And we're in a time now where judges in this country that don't share a traditional American worldview, for lack of a better way to say it, will not recognize God-given rights, and they'll only be stopped and only be, held in check by written legislation, and more importantly, more powerfully, a written constitution, which of course trumps those legislative issues. And so that's an important theme will point out during the discussion, because I think we need something like that.
Thank you. And question 2, Florida law explicitly outlines what school districts can and cannot require of home education families. However, parents frequently report local district staff overstepping these boundaries by requiring unauthorized paperwork. As governor, how would you ensure local county school boards and superintendents respect the strict limits placed on them by the state statutes?
Well, I'll have an aggressive, commissioner of education. I can tell you that, one that is pro homeschool, pro educational choice writ large, that believes in every child getting a world-class education wherever that may be. And so I would want, your association and other homeschool groups that would report up problems in a particular county and get a phone call. And if the phone call doesn't work, there's always disciplinary action. And if disciplinary action doesn't work at the lowest level, you can kind of increase that all the way through to removal. If there's someone who is on the warpath against homeschoolers, for example, then I would remove that person because they're violating the law.
Thank you for your answer. Question 3, do you think the educational landscape has grown too quickly recently in the name of school choice and innovation? Some think we've perhaps flown the flag of innovation and in the process ruined public schools. Do you think it's important to preserve public schools as they are, or do you think it's time for public school model to adapt itself to some of the innovation that's in the educational landscape? I know that's a loaded one. You can break it apart.
Yep. Yeah, well, I think the system, and again, I was the champion for HB1, which created PEP and universal school choice and educational choice writ large, and I think that does create, it absolutely creates more than any other state in America, pressure, competitive pressure, innovation pressure, not necessarily on homeschool parents who've made a choice, up front for reasons that have nothing to do with what I'm discussing, but for the public schools, it's not a question of ruining them. It's a question of creating an exit door. You can't have schools that are like the Hotel California where you can enter, but you can never leave. Every business has an entrance and an exit. And if you do a good job, people hit the entrance. If you do a bad job, people should be able to hit the exits. And so having that exit doesn't mean we're ruining public education. It just means that public education has to serve the needs of the parents and the students that attend there. And if they don't, there's now a way out. And that way out has never been broader and more open to homeschool parents than it is today if they elect PEP. And of course, so I don't think in any way, shape, or form we've ruined public education. And so that model I think will evolve. I think there's a case to be made for incrementalism in different areas. It's boring, but sometimes letting things change, move here, and then letting the system and everybody catch up with that, and then moving it farther in the direction we've been doing, I think has been a real successful path. Because as you know, Jeb Bush initially came out with what today we would call educational choice 25 plus years ago, 30 years ago. And I think it's 30 years ago now. And so I think that's the right approach. We're talking about real kids in real educational spheres, and we don't want to see dramatic change overnight that is going to be upsetting unless it's going to be really helpful in opening up that ability for parents to make that choice. Because at the core, parents have the primary right to raise, educate, and care for their children, period, full stop. That is a God-given right. And I can mention now, if we're just within the 2 minutes, so. Is that I...
Yeah.
We'll go to the next question.
So question 4, I'm going to say this one because it's a little bit of a longer question. I'm going to say the question, I'm going to give the full question and then repeat it. So the real heart of the question is, how will your administration protect the private funding models from the inevitable regulatory strings and oversight that might come in to make them conform to a public school system model? At the Home Education Foundation, we're not fond of the term school choice. It's reductive. It forces people to think of options that for education merely in terms of what school they go to. And there are so many successful methods to privately educate your children and use a customized approach. We even call PEP, but it's actually the personalized education program. You're personalizing the education. And so the concern is, so I'll repeat the question because that's the long lead up. How will your administration protect the private funding models from the inevitable regulatory strings and oversight that might come to make them conform to the public school system model?
And not, I'll just add, Jason, not to your question, if I can, not just for PEP, but for those that want not a single dollar because of a even more heightened concern over government intervention, government overreach, government coming in and telling you how you're going to educate. And so I've wrestled with this question, and I have to say, looking back, I wish I'd done it when I was speaker, but haven't had a lot of conversations with people since I got out of office in 2024 about, what do we do to protect? And I'm going to talk about traditional homeschool parents right now, but it applies certainly under that to the PEP folks who are taking that money. They'd be the first ones to see that intervention. It ultimately, the conclusion I reach is we need, and I have proposed, I'm the only candidate to propose a state constitutional amendment for parental rights that would say simply that parents have the right to raise, educate, and care for their children, period. And there's, more to it. And you can see that. And when we were at the homeschool convention here a couple of months ago, we passed those around and had a video describing why we need that. We need it for several reasons. One is educational. So for that traditional homeschool parent is the government doesn't have a right, because you've got a constitutional right to educate your child. And so they cannot come in and tell you how to do that. And that would, for those that aren't the lawyers in the room, the difference is you can pass a law. We have the laws today that don't have that intervention, but a Democrat governor through different means or Democrat legislature, if that were to happen, could come in, or Republican legislature for that matter, that's hostile to homeschoolers, could come in and pass something. But with a constitutional amendment, you can never pass a law that trumps the Constitution. That's the last word. And so having a constitutional amendment in place, I believe, is important for a couple of reasons. One is judges today, including judges I'm sure that are in the state of Florida, do not any longer adhere to what you and I and everybody listening would say are those God-given rights that just existed before 1776. And unless you have a constitutional amendment in place, even in the free state of Florida, you could have a problem. And I think that's the best answer I have to protect everyone in homeschooling at a level that it doesn't matter when I'm gone. If I'm not the governor anymore, I'm there for 8 years protecting everyone, then somebody comes behind me, there's that constitutional amendment to protect them going forward. And I think that the value of that cannot be understated, because it puts guardrails around judges who want to allow the government to reach in and do things that we would agree are a violation of that fundamental God-given right.
That went a little over, but I think you've already answered the next question. I'm going to ask it just for the sake of asking it, but I think your answer just now was perfect for it, so I think it just rolled right in. But the next question was, how will your administration protect the traditional, completely self-funded education programs from the potential regulatory whiplash and oversight that tend to follow public tax dollars? And you said that so well, just in your previous answer, but if there's anything you'd like to add, you still have a minute.
No, I'll get us back on time, and what it allows me to do is condition, the public to understand if the legislature passed something, is I veto it, and I say this violates the new parental rights amendment to our Constitution, and you can't come in and regulate. And I think having that kind of conditioning in the public view would be helpful. Obviously, as governor, I'll speak on behalf of parental rights altogether, not just in the homeschooling context, because this has broader reach than just education, to protect from things where you see kids being taken from their parents, not because of abuse, but because of a difference over values. And so not just homeschooling, but how you raise your kid. I'm going to raise my kids as Christians, and or teach them the gospel. That's happening in my home, whether the government likes it or not. But now we have governments in this country that are saying, no, that's not okay. We're going to take your kids away from you based on a difference over values. And that's why it's so important we have that amendment.
So question 6, 111 years, so 1915, Florida has had mandatory public school attendance laws. Mandatory attendance age from 6 to 16 has been in place for that long. And after more than 100 years of mandatory attendance, I think some of the latest reports said 44% of Florida students are reading on grade level. Do you think that it's time to look at more dramatic updates to the model for public education that maybe borrow from some of the private sector? And if so, any ideas?
Well, look, I think it's always good to share best practices. And I don't know anybody I know a lot of homeschool parents who are friends of mine. We're at that age. We have young kids. We're at that age of making that decision and hopefully doing the same. But, I think there's a lot of best practices to be shared. And all the people I know that homeschooled would share those ideas. Whether they would be taken up by a public school, superintendent or not is a different question. But I think we're always looking for how to do a better job of educating. I think some of those principles are, because I'm a big fan of the classical model, and I think some of those, it's classical for a reason because it works. And so this idea, of getting into progressive education where, we're going to throw out everything that's been done for a millennium and decide to do everything new. We're going to dump phonics, for example, and come up with a new way to teach reading by, take 3 guesses what what is that picture of an apple? And then, you know how to read apple. Well, no, you don't. This kind of thing we moved away from when I was speaker, to teach the science of reading, to get away from 3 cueing and some other flawed models when it comes to reading. But you're right. I mean, that data point, 40% plus, is failure, and it's morally unacceptable. So we have to get after these issues. And so the fact is, homeschool kids and private school kids too, but homeschool kids perform better than the public school kids do. And so the proof is in the data. And so they ought to listen. Whether they listen or not is a different story.
Question 7. Thank you for your answers, by the way. Question 7 has a lot of statistic lead up, so I sent you some of the stats so we could cut the time down. And so I'll get straight to the heart of the question. What can institutions of higher education and even maybe some of our K-12 schools do to kind of better learn and borrow from what has worked with the homeschooling students? Research has shown that they're scoring, homeschooled kids are scoring about 130 points higher, on average on college entrance exams, and 78% of peer-reviewed studies confirm that homeschool students perform statistically significantly better than some of the public school counterparts on standardized tests. So are there things that higher education institutions can look at that you're aware of to borrow from what has worked and in what's the word? Improve?
Yeah, it goes back to sharing best practices. I don't think the sharing part from the homeschool parents is a problem. The receiving and accepting part is probably the problem. The issue in higher education, in my mind, is the schools of education, which is going to filter into that schoolhouse model, obviously not necessarily homeschooling, but it's flawed. And so it is shown that there's a lot more political indoctrination, if you will, than really preparing aspiring teachers to be teachers. And so, but I do think there's, since you're bringing it up, I think, if there's an openness among homeschoolers to have that introduced in at the higher education level, there's things we can do to try to bring forward, kind of a consortium of, where ideas can be presented openly and have participation from homeschool associations and the like, to introduce these concepts that are working, and just say, look, here we are in the scores and the entrance exams and these kinds of things. Here's where you are. And, to me, that's all I need to hear is like, okay, I need to learn something to get to here that I'm missing because I'm down here. And again, it's probably not an unwillingness of people listening today to share. It's more an unwillingness of people who are stuck in an outdated model, a monopolistic model, to listen.
Thank you for your answer. Question 8. How do we protect the entire education landscape's freedom, independence, and foster innovation to ensure that attempts for oversight don't shipwreck the potential to raise all ships with a rising tide? There's a lot of money that's come in, a lot of innovations, a lot of opportunity, and typically there's some sort of whiplash that usually comes to put guardrails in place. And as the Home Education Foundation is squarely focused on home education rights for parents, that's not all we care about as a whole. So we're interested in kind of hearing some of your thoughts on how we protect the entire education landscape's freedoms and innovation.
Yeah, well, you're seeing some of that already. Look, when I was speaker and pushed through HB1, which created PEP, of course, in addition to universality. So everyone in Florida that has a child eligible in K through 12 has that scholarship available. Not everybody in the Republican Party or the House and Senate were happy about it. Not all the staff, to put it more bluntly, is happy about it. And so you have people that are advocating, have been since I've been gone, to I think they're afraid to directly unwind it, but they've tried to put up things that would make it very onerous, like having to report where you are, once a month, this kind of thing, that the very fears that we're talking about. So you need a governor that is willing to say it's dead on arrival. If you send me that bill and those kinds of regulations, it is dead. I'm telling you and your listeners, it is dead on arrival. We're not going to go backwards. And so I think that needs to be said again and again, because that political wins are not necessarily permanent. You have to continue to build in a culture that accepts, first and foremost, parental rights. Everything flows from that. Really, we roll everything up in this conversation. At the end of the day, it really is your listeners. It's that parents have the right. It's not about what school has the right to educate your children. It's that parents have a right to choose how that education happens and where it happens. And so if you don't have a governor who's vigilant on that, there's a lot of people in the legislature right now, the Republican legislature, who want to do the bidding of the school unions and unwind this, go after homeschool, go out, it's there. It's not a majority, but it's significant enough that they're trying to insert these little things in there that would just, be a death by 1,000 cuts, if you will, and approach it that way. And you have to have a governor who's going to say, not on my watch.
Thank you for your answer. This next one is there's a little bit of an understanding or a nuance to it. So if it doesn't make sense, just let me know. I'll just read it out. The higher representation of special needs children in homeschooling is about 24%. So 24% of families have a student with special needs versus 14% in the public school arena. And it reflects families actively choosing personalized environments where their child can thrive. For many of these families, home education is not an alternative. It's the only setting where their child can genuinely succeed. What do you think about the FEA's recently filed lawsuit against home education families with children with special needs using the scholarship, known as the FESUA, stating it was unconstitutional to fund them? Do you think those students deserve to learn environments customized to their special needs, or do you think they should be expected to deal with it so the public school can count their attendance for funding?
Well, I think you know my answer already from all the answers I've given. I'm vigorously opposed to that. As governor, we'll pick up the baton from this governor who's been a stalwart champion and oppose that litigation and obviously appeal if necessary. But I think it's not going to go anywhere, I hope, with this court. I would be confident that it would not. But it just signals the fact that this is a group of people that are bringing this lawsuit that care more about the adults that they represent, that are members of their union, and the institution they do, the kids that are our kids. They're not their kids. And so, to be clear, and so you need a governor who's going to vigorously oppose that. I will do that as governor, and take other steps to make sure that we don't have a powerful force in the education conversation that is not there for the kids. It's really there for the adults and the institutions.
Thank you for your answer. All right, question 10, and this is the last one. We have reserved, it looks about like roughly 2 minutes across the different questions on the clock for you to win the vote of our community. We love our freedoms. Our children are not mere creatures of the state. For 40 plus years, our families have paid their taxes into the public education system while simultaneously taking our children and making the personal sacrifices necessary to also pay out of our own pockets to provide their educational needs and opportunities. We have been met with resistance at every turn. We're deeply unsettled with the political climate, and we don't care about skin color, jersey color, side of the aisle. We want to know that we can work and that we can earn, and it'll be ours. The decisions that we make to raise our children are ours, and we want to know that we have a candidate that understands the sacred duty and burden of responsibility every parent has and supports that by recognizing their rights and fighting to protect them at every turn. So that's our community. That's who we are. What would you like to say? 2 minutes. What would you like to say to earn the vote?
Well, you want a governor who has been battle tested and someone who in their life has been serving others, not serving themselves. And so at age 23, I was on the deck of the USS McInerney navigating through mine-infested waters. I led a small boat team to destroy those mines. 20 years later in Afghanistan as a Navy commander, I led a team to stop foreign fighters from coming into Afghanistan to kill Americans. I went to law school, became a prosecutor in Broward County, which is not an easy place to be a prosecutor. So I've tried habitual and violent habitual offenders and stood up for victims. A lot of time in positions of trust and leadership under pressure. In both of those jobs, defending the country, defending our communities, are outward looking, not inward looking, like too many politicians that self-promote, get rich, have fun, and they forget about we the people. And so you want a governor who has been battle tested. You want a governor who's a proven leader who can get the results. And this governor described my 2 years in leadership as unmatched. He said separately that there wasn't another legislature in America that got more done consequentially for the conservative cause than when I led. And so that's the kind of governor you want. We put out bold policy positions. Relevant to this conversation is our proposal for a parental rights amendment. Obviously, that would be 2028, so it wouldn't be the first 100 days. But we've also put out a contract with Florida for the first 100 days to address affordability, public safety, going after taxes, insurance, electric bills, bringing those down. I'm opposed to the data centers. Keeping public corruption at bay and going after that, ending human trafficking, limiting death penalty appeals when people rape and kill children, the worst of the worst, and keeping Florida free, whether that's election integrity or an AI Bill of Rights, human or health freedom, rather. These kinds of things that we'll lean into to protect our citizens from a future that can both be bright, but can also be pretty chilling and threatening if we're not setting those guardrails, for example, on technology, to make sure that human beings control technology, not the other way around. And so when it comes to educational choice, there's nobody that is a bigger champion than Paul Renner throughout my time in the legislature, but especially creating the PEP program, proposing this parental rights legislation. And I will stop in their tracks anyone that goes after the freedom of parents, not just in education, but in the medical space, in mental health, to have the knowledge and consent by the parent, and not have people, elites today from the other side of the aisle, that believe they know better than you do how to raise your kids. And so if you want a champion, you're looking at them. And I would just say the more research you do, the more you're going to want me as your next governor. And if you would, please reach out to us. We'd love to have your support. You can go to voterenner.com.
All right, thank you for your time, and thank you for being with us today. Well, all right. That's interview 1, and I need to address something because I feel like it's a giant gorilla on my back or an elephant in the room. But if you noticed it, it probably was reminiscent of one of the old Godzilla movies where their lips didn't match the audio. And there is a voice modification. It's a noise canceller that is a built-in to the audio recording that when I capture, and I think it cut out empty space and shifted the audio. So it really looks like one of the old Godzilla movies where their lips just don't match. And I apologize profusely for that. Man, oh man. So, Mr. Renner, thank you for being...
the message anyway.
Yes, thank you for being with it. The audio was uncut, but I have to say, we didn't talk over each other. So where the noise canceling thing started to cut some of the silence out, that's because there was silence in between those little moments, and it thought maybe we just don't need any silence, so you should talk over each other. That didn't happen. He didn't talk over me, and I didn't talk over him. Just want to go, man, I wish I could fix that. But I promised to air these uncut and unedited, so you have it. Even my warts and all are on display. Listen, I don't have a team of producers. It's just me and the tools that we have.
And we're so thankful for you.
Well, I appreciate that, but I'm flawed, and clearly this has a little bit of flaws in it. But you've been able to hear at least from Paul Renner, and I appreciate him coming on and answering those questions so that the community could hear from him. While I get the next one set up, I'm going to cancel sharing the screen here and go back to just us. And let's see. Is there anything that you want to add before we bring the next one up? I'm grabbing it out of my files here.
No, I do think that you'll hear also from Byron Donalds that they both served in the legislature, which I think is really important. If they're going to be the governor, they need to know how to work with the legislature. The really important piece there.
Yes, and I'm going to unpin myself as well as you and see what happens when we share screen this time. So maybe we get... Somebody texted me and said, it's creepy seeing you twice, so I will... I'll do my best here to not be seen twice. You guys get enough of me when it's just me. You don't need me twice. How about that?
You can unpin me too.
Yeah.
Pin me back when we talk.
Well, either way it goes, it looks like I'm on here twice. So there it is. I guess it'll just be fair for everybody to have me on here twice. I do apologize. As you're watching, if you're watching this before we start the next one, at the end of these, feel free to comment, guys. We have the comments live. I see the comments coming in. Love the Delene Howell says, yay. She's here for another one. Didn't miss the live. Hi, Brenda. Hi, Jason. We see the comments as they come through, and we're absolutely grateful for all of you. But also, comment in here if you're, if this helps make the decision for you, if it helps sway you, like, feel free to say, like, oh, I think, 9 out of 10, this was a good job or whatever. Just because, we're curious and we want to know, but also it helps the video algorithm, and it also lets the candidates, when they view this, know that the questions they answered mattered to you. So anyway, without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and play the next one, and then I'm going to keep myself quiet. All right. And here we are with probably someone who needs no introduction, but we have Byron Donalds with us now. And we have the Home Education Foundation has put together a list of questions, and we're going to roll into them. Byron, thank you for being with us today. I really appreciate you making the time for the home education community to ask you some questions and get some answers that are just about education.
Well, I'm excited to be with you. Looking forward to the conversation. And so, whenever you're ready, let's begin.
All right. Before we jump right in, tell me something about you that maybe our viewers or listeners haven't heard yet, to help connect with who you are and something they may not know. Just
something people haven't heard about me at this point. That's a tough one. It seems about every day I'm getting asked something, but I'll give you this one.
okay.
When I was in my church, my wife and I, we were youth leaders for a decade. So every summer I would take a week off, a week of my vacation from my company, and we would take the teenagers in our youth group to camp. And it was a week-long camp, and I either was working security or organizing the games and like being a head referee. And so it's one of those deals where you're just out having a lot of fun and really helping to mentor, teenagers, which is it's a tough time in everybody's life. Teenage years are interesting years. The other interesting part is I spent really about 15 years coaching youth sports, football, basketball. Really love sports. I'm probably that coach that's yelled at a referee or two. Not even probably, I am. I've yelled at my fair share of referees. So, I'm pretty intense, especially when it comes to competition. So that's stuff that I don't get a chance to talk about. I figured I'd share.
That's great. I think that's some nice things that a lot of people can resonate with for sure. All right. Well, let's dive into these questions. To try to keep it fair, we asked all the candidates the same questions. Mm-hmm. And so I'll just roll them off. Question 1 is, in your view, does the state grant parents the right to educate their children, or does the state merely recognize an innate right that already belongs to the parents?
This is actually a good question. And I think before I got to the legislature back in 2016, I think the state viewed it as an innate right. My colleague, Erin Grawl, who's now in the state Senate, we served together in the House. At the time, she was drafting her parental bill of rights, which is the first time there was a section of that in Florida statutes. I know that a good chunk of it is now passed, and Governor DeSantis signed that into law. And so the governor, and this is to his credit, has really been moving the needle in terms of parents taking full responsibility for their children and not just being like kind of recognized by the state, but really being the rightful position that children belong to their parents, and parents have to be leading the charge, especially when it comes to education. And so under my administration, that we're going to continue that. I believe that parents are at the head of the table. Parents are the ones that make those decisions. The state, and if it has roles to it, is to help facilitate avenues for parents to take the lead. But parents are the ones who need to be making the determinate decision making for their children. They know their children better than anybody else, and we want parents to have the ability to fully direct the direction that their children take.
Very good. I didn't say this at the beginning, but any leftover time from this we'll kind of use at the end and allow. But it's about 2 minutes per question. You didn't go over. Okay. I failed to say that at the beginning. I don't want it to be clear. So you're good. You're good. That's just my clarification. All right, and then good answer. Question number 2. Florida law explicitly outlines what school districts can and cannot require of home education families. But parents frequently report that local district staff overstep their boundaries by requiring unauthorized paperwork or pressuring them in ways that step beyond their authority. As governor, how would you ensure local county school boards and superintendents respect the limits placed on them by state statutes?
So listen, another great question. Typically we find, whether it's districts or other forms of local government, they find ways to kind of step past what Florida statutes has allowed for. I think in this instance, it requires the Department of Education at the state level to really enforce the boundaries of what a school district can and cannot do, and not just allowing the district to essentially have mission creep in a lot of these fields, especially when it comes to parents, especially with homeschool parents who are trying to just make those decisions on behalf of their children, as they have every right to do.
All right. Thank you for your answer. Question 3. Do you think the educational landscape has grown too quickly in recent years in the name of school choice and innovation. Some think that perhaps we've flown the flag of innovation and in the process of that maybe ruined public schools or had a massive negative impact on public schools. And do you think, well, I'll let you answer that one first and then there's a follow-up.
I don't think so. I think people who try to put a cap on innovation or try to put innovation in the box really don't allow for the beauty of the free market to create the next wave of maybe it's policies or maybe it's some sort of innovation or even the actual environment that in this instance education can take place in. I know for some of the larger school districts it's been disruptive and I understand that, but I think that begs the question that because we've been so innovative in Florida, parents now have a real opportunity to make decisions on behalf of their children. If parents are choosing other means for education than the traditional district, and it's causing disruption to the traditional district, then what that does mean from a market perspective is that the district was not really addressing the needs and the desires of parents. And so, yes, there's been some disruption, but I think that disruption only is going to benefit the children of the state of Florida.
You kind of already answered the follow-up, but I'll ask it anyway. It's do you think it's important to preserve public schools as they are, or do you think it's time for public schools to perhaps look at the model and adapt to some of that education innovation?
Yeah, they need to look at the market and adapt for themselves. And I think the districts, if I were going to be in their position, yeah, I would assume they're very concerned or if not terrified, because the landscape has changed really over the last 6-7 years in Florida. And that's, you know, if you were the monopoly in any industry, that would be a very a scary time for you. But I think it's also a golden opportunity for the school districts. The school districts, if I were a superintendent, I would be looking at ways to be far more dynamic, far more nimble, to be able to attract parents to my institutions. And I think trying to live in the past or hoping that the legislature will change the rules or change the funding formulas to preserve them, that actually diminishes the innovation that we all want to see. I believe there should be an economy of education. I think it should be very broad. I think there should be many different pathways, many different options. And I think that's only leads to the betterment of the children, and it's to the best interest of the parents who want their kids to have the most dynamic and best academic experience while their kids are at home.
All right. Thank you for that answer. I appreciate it. I'm glad I asked the follow-up because you had a lot more to say. So that's great. So question 4, as the Home Education Foundation, we really don't like the term school choice. We find it reductive, and we prefer to look at things from the standpoint of educational choice and look at it more broadly and open. With the expansion of the customized educational choices like the PEP program, funding is increasingly entering private sectors. Scholarship funding organizations are raising the funds to meet the needs of those parents and students in those programs. How will your administration protect the private funding models from the inevitable regulatory strings and oversight that might come in to make them conform to be more like the public school model?
Well, first, let's take the end of your question. The end of your question, I think conformity to the public school model would be going backwards from where Florida is naturally going because of parents choosing the environment. And so I don't want to do that. I think that would not be in the best interest of kids. I think in terms of what we call it, to be honest, as an elected official, I've used school choice a lot. And I've also used parental choice. My wife, she uses educational freedom. I think in terms of the words we put to it, I think I can understand where there will be concerns about just wanting to be confined to schools in terms of how we know them to be brick and mortar buildings that have either grades K through 8 or K through 12 or 9 through 12 or whatever the case might be. I think for me, like I was saying earlier, it's really just about having an economy of education. So if it's traditional public schools, that falls within the box. If there are charters, that falls within. If there are homeschools, that falls within. Co-ops, private schools, religious schools. To me, as long as the child is getting educated, that then creates the contours of what the economy looks like. In terms of the funding apparatus, we want to make sure that the funding apparatus is nimble and flexible enough to be able to accomplish all of those. I guess I'll call them avenues. I don't want to put them into a box, but as long as the funding is allowed to allow for all those various avenues where education occurs to be funded, so kids can get the things that they need and that they deserve.
Understood. All right. This next question is question 5. It's a little similar, but maybe further down the track. So there are those in the home education community, especially here in Florida, who they fear what the funding does in coming with strings attached. And certainly history kind of does bear some of that out. How will your administration protect the traditional, completely self-funded home education programs from the potential regulatory whiplash or oversight that tends to follow public tax dollars?
Well, this is an interesting question. I think the accountability landscape in Florida under my administration, I think we're going to see some changes. I think there need to be. If you look at the accountability framework just for the K-12 system, I actually think it's kind of outdated. And that's something that needs to be brought into where we are today. I think, for the time we have been, even since Jeb Bush's A-plus plan, and let me be clear, at that time in Florida's history, we needed Jeb Bush's A-plus plan. There's no doubt about that. I think the history has been clear how that's been very helpful to understanding our kids even learning in some of these schools. I think that's important. But where we are right now, especially with technology today, I think progress monitoring is probably more capable today than it ever has been. I think if you're going to talk about in the homeschool environment, that's a very different environment altogether. I think in the homeschool environment, it's really more output driven that parents are seeing. And I think, there's many outputs of that. If a child is homeschooled from kindergarten to 5th grade, then they get integrated in middle school or they get integrated in high school. Integration meaning going to a school, not a public school, but just any school. I think there's that question of, well, where does the child in terms of their ability to enter a more traditional classroom environment in order to then move along with that classroom environment. But I think that's kind of where the beginning and end of it is. I think for homeschool parents, it's very different if you're going to talk about accountability measures versus large institutions that are being put together where you have millions, if not tens of millions of dollars going into a school environment.
Yeah, and if I could maybe restate the question a little bit more narrowly, I appreciate your answer, but we have some listeners who are very fiercely freedom loving and don't want any regulation at all on the home education program. So in a hyper focus follow up to this question, for the parents who aren't taking part in funds or systems, they're enjoying the freedoms of the home education under 1002.41 statutes. The question is, as far as the regulatory whiplash that comes from the spotlight being put on some of these programs that do get the funding, is there a chance of seeing the home education crowd who isn't being funded by those programs swept up into some of those regulations?
Oh, no, absolutely not. No, not whatsoever. I do know that there are parents, and quite frankly, we have private schools that don't want to be a part of the funding program. And so then they continue to operate like they have been. And I think that's something where if you make that choice of your own volition, that's fine by me. I have no problems with that.
All right. Question number 6. It's been 111 years since 1915. Florida has had mandatory public school attendance laws from the ages of 6 to 16. And you had spoken recently and said 44% of Florida students are not reading on grade level. Do you think it's time to look at a more dramatic update to the model and borrow from some of the private sector?
I do. Oh, absolutely, I do. I think a couple of reasons. One, the public school system, as we've known it, it's always kind of opposed or has been dragged into innovation. And I think probably the better word is dragged into innovation. They've only decided to make changes when it became very clear, not just from an outcome perspective, but from a political perspective, that they had no choice. And so they're kind of in this position of, if we don't make a change now, we could be in more trouble down the line. And I think that leads to kind of perverse incentives. I think what we should be doing is making sure that in a lot of these, and frankly, and not even forget the schools for a moment, in the framework upon which Florida is going to set standards, we should be making sure that we're following best practices and what helps kids read online. And to be real specific, for me, that's the science of reading. That's understanding phonetical awareness early on, being able to conjugate and break down complex texts over time. To be honest, a lot of homeschool parents and families have been doing this for decades in Florida and continue to do that today. And so what that's really proven is that it's a far better model for literacy and for reading comprehension than any fad that has gone through the educational system over the last 60 years in the United States overall, and obviously in Florida. So, I mean, I hope I answered your question there, but I think what we want to do is really just be focused on tried and true methods, make sure that we're implementing those. And I think from the state's perspective, it's about pushing that out to schools and to districts so that they, especially the ones obviously they're under the public system, that's the model that they're following. And if it ends up with, not even if, I know it will, when it ends up with kids reading at significantly higher levels, mastering math and reading and writing, that's only to the benefit of kids. And so I think we need to take a serious look at that. The grading system, it's time for a complete upgrade of the grading system in Florida. I think that can only be to the betterment of our children.
Thank you for your answer. This next one has a bit of a lead up, so bear with me. There were some kind of stats and reports that we had sent over for you to take a look at. They showed that homeschooled students on average score 130 points higher than public school students when it comes to entering into the college environment. And over 78% of peer-reviewed studies confirmed that homeschool students perform statistically significantly better than public school students on those standardized assessments. What can institutions of higher education and even some of our K-12 schools do a little better to borrow from what has worked for some of these students?
You know, this is where I think for the traditional schools, this is where it somewhat can get complicated. Because let's examine homeschooling for a moment. You have a parent, obviously, who's taking time for their children, are sourcing probably the best material possible to help educate their kids. And then also are taking some of the individual time to make sure reinforcement is encouraged. And I think that's also one of the key things. I think the other thing with homeschooling, which has always been an advantage over traditional schooling, is that, a parent is taking the time and the energy to make sure that the child is mastering skill sets before they move on to the next skill set, which is something that in a large class environment, if we just look at the data speaks for itself, has just not been occurring. So I think if there's something that to be taken from the homeschool environment, it's making sure that our kids are mastering material before they move on to the next level of material. And I think you can't really look at it in terms of, they scored this on the 3rd grade benchmark test, or they scored this on the 4th grade NAEP, or they scored this on the 8th grade test, or whatever the case might be. It's making sure that as kids are moving between grades, that they're mastering subject matter at each grade. The other thing that I think the traditional schools are really going to have to look at is how are we going to deal with tutoring? I think that tutoring, especially during the summertime, is going to be really important for a lot of kids because summer slide is real. You have a child who's out of school for 2.5 months. They're not, whatever's going on at home is what's going on at home. But when they come back to the classroom, what we've seen is that typically the school districts are having to re-educate or remediate from last year's material before they move into the next material for the next grade. And so I think these are some of the things that I think if the school districts are taking a look at and trying to understand the dynamics of what happens in the homeschool environment versus the traditional environment, I think a lot of it is really around the tools and the training to master subject matter before they move on. I think to your point, what the data yields, it demonstrates scaffolding, I think. And I talk about it in terms of scaffolding, especially mathematics, because if you're a contractor, if you're going to build a skyscraper, you can't build a scaffold up to build the next floor unless the floors below it are sturdy and strong and stable. Well, in mathematics, it's very hard to teach a kid Algebra 1 if they had struggles in 6th grade and 4th grade math, because it all builds on top of each other. And I think that's what the traditional schools are going to have to really come to grips with if they're going to be able to compete with the other avenues of education in Florida's economy of education.
Thank you for the answer. Question number 8. Home education, especially here in Florida, has been full of a history of experimenting to discover what works. And there's some adapting. We do things and they don't work, and we throw them out and we pivot. And that is the kind of the beauty of home education. And as money has started to be invested into established communities, and put towards some valid opportunities, there's also some backlash that arises. And this isn't necessarily a home education only question, but it's for kind of the overall expansion of the education landscape and the freedom of choices in it. How do we protect the entire education landscape's freedom and independence and foster the innovation to ensure that attempts for oversight don't shipwreck the potential to raise all ships with that rising tide?
This is actually a really good question. I think that when you're talking about how do you allow for the innovation to take place without stifling it because of checklists, I think the way you do that is you want to encourage an innovative environment. Here's what we know, not just in education, but in life. If all you do is stay to a static model and you just say that nothing ever fails, you also have to ask yourself the same question: does something have an opportunity to succeed? And what I mean by that is that let's take homeschooling, because it's a very personal one-on-one environment. Yes, you can try a new method of teaching science, for an example, and if it's not bearing fruit, it's easy to get rid of that. And like we were talking about in the previous question, kind of going back, making sure that those concepts are being retaught before you move on to the next level. Right. When you're dealing with large systems, the large systems typically are not nearly as nimble. So there is a desire to not do that, or to, quite frankly, take longer with the process that's not working. Common Core would be an excellent example of that. Take longer with the process that's not working, and then you kind of change the grading or you change the accountability so that nobody has to admit it was not working. I think that's just not healthy. So from my perspective, as being the state's next governor, I'm not going to get caught up in somebody trying a new way, as long as it's based by, evidence of how we're going to teach science. Because if it doesn't work, or we start to see it doesn't work, I would rather the environment, quite frankly, I would rather the administration and the bureaucracy pull it out quickly and then go back and try to redo that, as opposed to try to change the entire accountability spectrum to basically say that we know this wasn't as good as the last one, but it's okay because it's what we got. And I think what you really want to have is a very nimble system of accountability, so that even though there are things that are innovatively tried, we still have time for that child to help that child progress to the next level that they need to progress to. And this has been my concern for a long time with traditional public schools, is that they were too caught up in trying to justify the decision for the new fad, as opposed to acknowledging it's not working and making sure these kids get what they need before they move on, because the kid only has one shot at their education. The adults, we can try and try and try again. And I think also with where we are today, for the most part, we pretty much know what works in education. We know what works. The question is there the diligence and the desire to make sure that we're implementing that and we're executing that for children?
All right, thank you. Question 9. The higher representation of special needs children kind of rests in the homeschool community, with about 24% of families having a student with a disability versus in the public school environment, about 14% is that threshold. For many families, home education isn't an alternative. It's the only setting where their child can genuinely succeed. What do you think about the FEA's recently filed lawsuit against the home education families with children with special needs who use the FESUA scholarship, stating that it was unconstitutional to fund them?
No, I disagree with the union, but that's not a shock. I disagree with them a lot on a myriad of issues. I think this is again one of the last gasps of the union trying to establish some semblance of control for the traditional system. But the truth is, you can't have a traditional system with 3.5 million kids. Children are obviously too different. And now in the environment today, lifestyles are so dynamic. We have parents who work from home for a myriad of reasons. We have parents who travel a lot, but they still have, obviously, so the home dynamics are far more different today in America than they were 60 years ago or 30 years ago. That's a fact. That's just very clear. And so I think it's important that those students, those families with students with special needs, they get access to every tool that they can get access to for the matriculation of that child. This is where, my wife and I, our view is that these dollars really are, because as a society, we have decided, we've made the bet long ago in the United States of America that education and the funding of education is critical for the future of our nation, and it's critical for the future of our state. And I'm not interested in arguing with bureaucrats or arguing with unions about how those dollars are disseminated. I think those dollars should be disseminated so that children can get access to them and help them get educated and prepare themselves to be functioning adults who have an ability to be economically viable for themselves so they can build families for themselves. And I think that's what matters more than anything else. I'm opposed to the union's lawsuit. That doesn't make any sense to me. We should be empowering parents and helping these children, not fighting over dollars.
All right. Final question number 10. This one has a little bit of a lead up, so bear with me.
Sure.
As the home education community, we love our freedoms. Our children are not mere creatures of the state, and for 40 plus years here in Florida, our families have paid their taxes into the public education system while simultaneously taking our children and making the personal sacrifices necessary to pay out of our own pockets to provide their educational needs and opportunities. And we've been met with resistance at many turns. We've a little deeply unsettled at the current political climate, and we don't care about skin color or jersey color or side of the aisle. We want to know that we can work and that what we earn will be ours. The decisions that we make to raise our children are ours. And we want to know that we have a candidate who understands the sacred duty and burden of responsibility that every parent has and supports that by recognizing their rights and fighting to protect them at every turn. You have 2 minutes on the clock. You can say anything you would like to say to earn their vote. This is your community. This is who's listening. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure and really an honor to be here with everybody. When I got into politics a decade ago, the reason why I ran for the state house is because I wanted to be a champion for education freedom in the state of Florida. This was before the family empowerment scholarships or many other scholarships that everybody takes advantage of today. But on a personal level, my mom was a school choice mom before school choice was even a thing. And that was back in the early 80s in New York City. I know innately from my mother and even watching my wife with my own 3 sons that parents deserve and must be at the head of the table. And so as governor, we're going to protect that. We're going to enhance that. We want parents to be making these determinations, not the state, not bureaucrats. We know that when parents are making these decisions with dollars, that they're going to make them far better than any of us can tell you what to do with those dollars. And so that's my commitment to the families of Florida, that we will protect your rights. These are your children. It is your responsibility to educate them. And we want to make sure that you have every resource at your disposal in order to do that. In terms of bureaucracy and in terms of regulation, we want to have an economy of education in our state. And the reason why I believe so strongly in that is because we've seen what the past has brought us. Most of our kids are not mastering math, reading, and writing by the time they graduate high school. Many of them do not have a plan for success or a pathway towards success. And what we are seeing are young people who are now frustrated and concerned about their futures. If we look at the past and realize that it's not worked for our children, then maybe the better path forward is to give all the parents all the autonomy that they need for the future of their children. And maybe, just maybe, we'll have a world-class K-12 education system, as diverse and dynamic as it may be, that puts children in the best place to be possible for them to succeed for their futures. So I'm asking for your vote on August 18th. My pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Byron, thank you for taking your time out of your absolutely busy schedule and squeezing us in. This is last minute for those of you who don't know. We will be going live tomorrow. And I appreciate you for taking that and making that personal sacrifice and taking that time to be with us and for our community to hear from you. So thank you again.
No problem at all. Thank you.
get my microphone back on. All right, there they are. It is 1:20, so they went a little long, but I figured we secured the two, so I just let them roll and do their thing. Thank you all for being with us today. If you have questions and comments, put them in there. I'm going to read Jennifer Scott's comment here real quick. She says, this helps greatly. Are there statistics on your website? How many homeschoolers are in Florida? How many PEP versus UA recipients? Is Step Up for students posting testing results from PEP students compared to public school students? You mentioned 24% had unique abilities in homeschool setting versus 14% in public school settings. I like to see those stats. We will post the stats where we got our information, the sources on our blog post. We're going to take all of these. These are going to go out to YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio. It's going to go out wherever our podcast goes. And then we're also going to put it on our blog, on our website, flhef.org. You'll see the blog post there. We'll also post it in our Discord community so that people will be able to find that information. I'm okay, if Brenda's okay with it, also posting a copy of the questions that we sent to the candidates so that you can read the questions for yourselves. And you can see all the sources are cited in there as well, because we wanted our candidates to know we didn't just pull these out of thin air when we sent it to them. So you'll see all the places where the sources, where that information came from as well. So great question. Absolutely great question. I'll plug our Discord again because it is there, at flhef.org/Discord. You can go, it's free. We do not charge for that. There is a channel for every county in the state of Florida there where when issues come up, we find them. People will post about them. Some of the members in other channels like Alachua, we have Brad who's in there. Thank you, Brad. I know you're watching. Cooper, hi as well. And he watches the school board meetings and kind of helps us keep tabs on Alachua County. And we're looking for parents who are interested in doing those types of things to be able to post. It's a community effort. There is no cost. We do have a couple of rules where if you do answer questions, you do need to cite sources because we don't traffic in opinions. It's meant to be a helpful resource to people so that they can feel confident about their choices and move forward with knowledge and information behind them. You have heard from these two candidates. There are others. They weren't able to make it or declined. And I'm not going to go into who and which did what. We have Paul Renner, former Speaker of the House, and we had Byron Donalds on. And I would love to hear from you in our Discord and in our comments here. If this was helpful for you in hearing those questions asked, they were very important to us and our board. The freedoms that we fight for and aim to protect, regardless of who becomes governor, it is our mission. It's our guiding light. So that's what was of most concern to us. And we've tried to listen to our community and ask questions that were important to you all as well. And I hope you feel that we represented you well in those questions. Some of them are yours. So, Brenda, I always give you last say, but we've both kind of sat quiet and listened to these as well. Is there anything you'd like to talk about today or dive into or say?
I think it was an excellent opportunity for the candidates to focus on their education agenda. You did a great job with the questions and giving them opportunity to lay it out. I tell you, it's a hard decision to make for governor based on just these two candidates. Yeah. They both have very good experience and knowledge in this area, having been in the Florida legislature. And I think parents need to dig in more to make a final decision on who would make the best governor of Florida.
Yeah, we were, with all the rhetoric bouncing around about, going to debates and having debates and not attending a debate and things like that. We saw some comments even today in the comments that are coming through. We worked very hard to get the candidates to come answer questions that were hyper-focused on education issues and hyper-focused on parental authority. Because whether or not they debate, we do want to hear their genuine, authentic answers to those Very important questions to us, and I hope that you got to see some of that. I'm a little saddened that we didn't get more of the candidates, but that is the campaign trail. That is the way that it goes, unfortunately. And these are going to go up. We're also going to cut some of these. We're going to send them the footage as well so that they can make use of it as they try to reach out to other parents who maybe don't even see this podcast. If you have someone that is on the fence or they're thinking about it, and they just need more information, or they want to know what the candidates think about all the stuff that we do, send this to them. Let them know. Like, provide this as a resource to them. You heard it straight from them. We're not having to repost anything that they say or cut it up or splice it. You got to hear the questions asked and the questions answered, and I hope that it helps. So that's our mission, to provide information that is helpful and make connections for home education families so that they can be empowered with that information to make better decisions or make informed decisions in their lives. So that is it for today, unless there's anything else, Brenda, that you would like to mention.
I just want to say that people who appreciate this need to be supporting the work you're doing, because it does take time and it does take a lot of expertise and energy to be able to provide this kind of information. And, a small donation monthly would just help us so much. If 155 students, if their parents would just donate $5 a month, $5, that's a cup of coffee. Just commit to $5 a month. You will allow us to continue the great work that Jason's doing. And, oh, by the way, he needs to support his family too. So they're a one-income family, just like most of the home education families are one income. But what is the most important thing to you as a parent is the freedom to educate your children the way you want to. And it takes somebody at the Capitol to defend those rights every legislative session. So if you can't be there to do it yourself, then support Jason as he's going up there to do the work.
Thank you. And, just to echo that, where else have you heard these questions? Right? I haven't heard. Patrick Bet-David's debate was great. It was fantastic. But I didn't hear any of these questions. And these, to me, are at the heart of the fabric of our whole society, that parents have the rights over their own children, their education, how to raise them, what to teach them, full stop. And if you're hearing a lot of the debates, or you're hearing a lot of the questions or interviews from other places, and they're not getting to what you need, we just did. And Brenda's not wrong. It takes a lot of work to get through the gatekeepers and to build the relationships and have other people helping us get to those places that we need. And there's 152,000 home education students, and there's another 80 to 100,000 PEP students in the state. That's quite a bit. And I watch the kind of monthly donations, and I see the names, and then I see you at conferences and the conventions, and it's good to meet and put names with faces. And then I also see the cancellations, and it's like, oh, that's too bad. That's too bad. We'd love to have you support us, flhef.org/support. It's very simple. You can set up a monthly subscription tier, $5 a month even, and just show your support. We made it very, very simple and easy to do. To all of those who do support us, I'm going to roll in to that. To all of those who do support us, thank you. From the bottom of our hearts to the top of our hearts, thank you. Thank you for your support. Parents who love their freedoms in Florida, we do too, and we're here with you, and we thank you for your support. To our top sponsors, Arete, FPEA, Fisher Precious Metals, TBHC Group, thank you as well for the support that you give. And without anything further, have your Monday back and enjoy those memories, those moments. The children are yours. Certainly it's summer, so most everybody is off, but my children are not. We do schooling all year round. Those poor kids. But do your thing the way that you do it. You're free. You have your freedoms. We're here to fight for them. Enjoy your Monday. Make the best of every moment. And we'll see you all next week.